Darius Blackwell had learned to measure time in two ways: the hours he worked and the minutes he spent with his daughter. Tonight he was giving up precious minutes of the latter for something that felt increasingly foolish with each passing second. The restaurant Maria, a name he'd had to Google twice to pronounce correctly, sat him at a table near the window where the Manhattan skyline pressed against the glass like an accusation. 47 minutes. He'd been sitting here for 47 minutes watching couples lean across candlelit tables while his own remained empty except for an untouched glass of water and a menu he couldn't afford to order from. The suit jacket draped over the back of his chair belonged to his friend Marcus, who worked security at a corporate office in Midtown. The shirt was Darius's own, washed and pressed 3 times until the collar stood crisp enough to hide the fact that it came from a discount rack in Queens. His watch. Angela's last gift before the cancer took her caught the light as he checked it again. 7:23. The reservation had been for 6:30. His phone buzzed against the white tablecloth. Mrs. Hartford's name appeared on the screen, and guilt twisted through his chest before he even read the message. "Naomi's asking when you'll be home. She wants you to read the chapter about the solar system. I told her you'd be back by 8:30. Darius typed back quickly, fingers too large for the small keyboard. "Tell her I'll read 2 chapters to make up for it. Be home soon." The lie tasted bitter even through text. He wasn't leaving yet. Something stubborn and pathetic kept him rooted to this chair, unwilling to admit that he'd shaved and borrowed a suit and taken a subway into a part of the city where people like him only appeared to fix things all for a woman who couldn't be bothered to send a single message explaining her absence. Mrs. Hartford had been the one to push him toward this. She was a widow herself, 72 years old, with hands that shook when she poured tea, but never when she braided Naomi's hair. She'd found the dating app on her own phone, set up a profile before showing him how to do the same. "You're 38 years old, Darius. Angela wouldn't want you turning into a ghost in your own life." The memory of that conversation made him reach for the water glass, finally taking a sip just to have something to do with his hands. The water was room temperature now, flat and tasteless. Around him, the restaurant hummed with the kind of easy wealth he'd only ever encountered from the outside. Men in suits that fit properly, women whose jewelry caught the light without trying, waiters who moved between tables like dancers, their trays balanced with the kind of grace that came from years of practice and good wages. He didn't belong here. The realization settled over him like a familiar coat, worn and uncomfortable, but impossible to remove. He was a 38-year-old HVAC technician who lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn with his 7-year-old daughter and a collection of debts that never seemed to shrink no matter how many emergency calls he took at 3 in the morning. This restaurant, this date, this whole attempt at pretending he could be something other than what he was, it had been a mistake from the start. His phone buzzed again. For a desperate second he thought it might be her, the woman from the app, whose profile had shown a smile that seemed genuine and eyes that didn't look through him the way most people's did. But it was just Marcus. "How's it going? She sweep you off your feet yet?" Darius didn't answer. What would he say? That he'd been stood up, that he was sitting alone in a restaurant full of people who probably wondered why the busboy was occupying a table. He set the phone face down and looked out the window instead, watching yellow cabs stream past like cells in a bloodstream, the city's pulse visible and relentless. The truth was, he'd known this would happen. Not consciously maybe, but somewhere deep in the part of him that had learned to expect disappointment, he'd prepared for this exact scenario. Women who agreed to blind dates with men like him didn't actually show up. They saw the neighborhood listed in his profile, Brooklyn, not Manhattan, or one of the trendy parts of Queens that white people had started moving into. They saw the job description that didn't include words like executive or director. They saw the single photo he'd posted taken by Naomi in their living room, his smile awkward because he'd never learned how to perform happiness for a camera. And then they made other plans. He should leave, pay for the water. Did you have to pay for water? He didn't know the rules here, and take the subway back to Brooklyn where he belonged. Naomi would be waiting, probably already in her pajamas with the spacebook open on her lap, her dark eyes tracking the planets like she could memorize their orbits through sheer force of will. She had Angela's eyes. Angela's curiosity too, that hunger to understand how things worked, why the universe arranged itself the way it did. Darius reached for his wallet, ready to signal for the check, when movement at the table beside him caught his attention. A woman sat alone, her posture rigid in a way that suggested military training or corporate discipline. She stared at her own untouched water glass with the kind of focus people usually reserve for bad news or difficult decisions. Her hair, dark, pulled back in a style that was professional without being severe, caught the light when she shifted, and Darius noticed the way her fingers drummed against the tablecloth in a rhythm that seemed unconscious. nervous. She was waiting for someone too. The realization shouldn't have mattered. Everyone in this restaurant was waiting for something, the next course, the check, the moment when they could leave and return to lives that made sense. But there was something about the set of her shoulders, the way she kept glancing toward the door with an expression that cycled between hope and resignation, that felt painfully familiar. 7:31. His blind date was officially an hour late. The woman beside him checked her phone, a quick furtive glance that she tried to hide by adjusting her napkin, and Darius saw the same disappointment flicker across her face that he'd been trying to keep off his own. The words formed before he could think them through, pushed forward by some combination of solidarity and the reckless feeling that came from having nothing left to lose. "Your blind date didn't show up either." His voice came out quieter than intended, barely audible above the restaurant's ambient noise. For a second he thought she hadn't heard him, or worse, that she'd heard and chosen to ignore the presumptuous question from a stranger at the next table. Heat crawled up his neck, and he started to turn away, already composing the apology he'd mutter if she complained to the staff. But then she looked at him. Her eyes were grey, not the flat grey of concrete, but something lighter, almost silver in the candlelight. They took him in with a directness that made him acutely aware of every borrowed and second-hand element of his appearance, but there was no judgment in her gaze. Just surprise, followed quickly by something that might have been recognition. Not of him specifically, but of the situation they both found themselves in. She responded, and her voice carried the kind of measured control that came from years of guarding words carefully. "How did you know?" Darius gestured vaguely at his own table at the single-place setting and the water glass that matched hers in its abandonment. "Because I've been sitting here for an hour doing the same thing you're doing, checking the door, checking my phone, trying to figure out if I should feel angry or just stupid." A ghost of a smile touched her lips there and gone so quickly he might have imagined it. "Which one did you decide on?" He considered the question seriously, surprised to find himself in an actual conversation instead of drowning in his own embarrassment. "Mostly stupid, a little angry, but that might just be because anger's easier than admitting I got my hopes up." She nodded, and the gesture held more weight than it should have, like she understood exactly what he meant, had maybe felt the same progression of emotions over the past hour. First time. The question could have meant several things, but Darius understood. "Yeah. First blind date. First date of any kind in—" He paused, doing the math in his head and not liking the answer. 4 years. Something shifted in her expression. Not pity. He would have recognized pity and hated her for it. This was different, softer. "I'm sorry," she said, and he believed she meant it. They fell into silence then, but it wasn't the uncomfortable kind. It was the silence of two people who'd found themselves in the same absurd situation and were still deciding whether to acknowledge it further or retreat back into their separate disappointments. Around them, the restaurant continued its performance of elegance and ease, but at their adjacent tables, the script had gone off course. Darius knew he should leave it there, thank her for the brief connection, pay his non-existent bill, and go home to Naomi. But something about the woman's presence, the way she seemed both completely composed and barely holding together, made him want to extend the moment. Maybe because talking to her felt less pathetic than sitting alone. Or maybe because there was something magnetic about someone who'd been wounded in the same way at the same time in the same place. The words came out before he could stop them, propelled by the same reckless impulse that had made him speak in the first place. "I know this is probably against some kind of protocol, but if you don't mind, I could move to your table, instead of both of us sitting alone, I mean." He watched her process the suggestion, saw the calculation happen behind those grey eyes. She was weighing risks, considering angles, making the kind of rapid assessment that suggested she spent a lot of time making decisions that mattered. Finally, she answered, and he heard the surprise in her own voice, like she was startling herself. "I have conditions." Darius felt his eyebrows rise. "Conditions?" She leaned forward slightly, and he caught a hint of perfume, something subtle and expensive that probably cost more than his rent. "No last names, no questions about what we do for work, no asking where we live, just this, right now. Two people who got stood up having a conversation." The specificity of the rules told him something important. She was used to being wanted for what she had rather than who she was. The realization made him curious, but he respected the boundaries even as she drew them. "Deal," he said, already reaching for his jacket. "But I get to add one condition of my own." She tilted her head, waiting. "We split the bill, whatever we order, if we order anything. I'm not here to be rescued, and I'm guessing you're not either." The smile that broke across her face was genuine this time, transforming her features from merely attractive to something approaching beautiful. Fair enough. Darius gathered his things and moved to her table, hyper-aware of the weight of eyes that might or might not have been watching. The maitre d' glanced over with an expression that could have been disapproval or simple curiosity. But Darius ignored it. He'd spent 38 years learning to ignore looks to build calluses around the assumptions people made about where he belonged and why. He settled into the chair across from her, and the new proximity made him notice details he'd missed from the next table. The way her hands, despite their professional manicure, bore small scars along the knuckles. The slight tension in her jaw that suggested she ground her teeth at night. The fact that her dress, while elegant, was simple enough to blend in rather than stand out, a choice that seemed deliberate. She extended her hand across the table. "Eva." He took at her grip firm and dry. "Darius." Their hands clasped for exactly 3 seconds before releasing the social contract fulfilled. Eva's fingers retreated to the stem of her water glass, and Darius realized he was mirroring the gesture with his own. They were both holding on to something, even if it was just lukewarm water in overpriced glassware. A waiter materialized beside their table with the practiced timing of someone who'd been monitoring the situation. "Good evening. Can I start you with something to drink?" Darius opened his mouth to order water-free safe already in front of him, but Eva spoke first. "Coffee, please. Decaf." Then she glanced at Darius, one eyebrow raised in question. He heard himself say "same," even though he'd been planning to get home in the next 30 minutes, and caffeine, even decaf, would keep him wired past midnight. But something about the gesture, her ordering first, making the decision to stay to actually have this conversation, made him want to match it. The waiter disappeared, and they were alone again in the bubble of their adjacent disappointments, turned into something else. Eva broke the silence first. "So, 4 years since your last date? That's a long time." Darius considered deflecting, making a joke about how he'd been focused on his career or traveling or any of the acceptable excuses people gave for romantic absence. But she'd been honest with him, or honest enough, and the least he could do was return the favor. "My wife died 4 years ago this November. Cancer." The words still felt foreign in his mouth, like a language he'd learned but never mastered. 4 years should have been long enough to make peace with them, but some truths stayed raw no matter how many times you spoke them aloud. Eva's expression shifted, something genuine breaking through the professional mask. "I'm sorry." The same words she'd said earlier, but weighted differently now. "Do you have kids?" He felt his whole body relax at the question the way it always did when people asked about Naomi. "A daughter, Naomi. She's 7. The words came easier now, flowing into territory he knew how to navigate. "Smart as hell, smart as anything. Obsessed with space. Wants to be an astronaut or a physicist. Changes her mind every other week, but never wavers from wanting to understand how the universe works." Eva's smile returned, smaller, but warmer. "She sounds remarkable." Darius pulled out his phone without thinking, swiping to the photo that lived as his lock screen. Naomi at the Museum of Natural History, standing beneath the planetarium with her head tilted back, mouth open in wonder. Mrs. Hartford had taken the picture while Darius paid for their tickets, a splurge he'd saved for over 3 months to afford. He turned the screen toward Eva, watching her face as she studied the image. "That's her. Taken about 2 months ago." Eva took the phone, her fingers careful as they held the device. She looked at the photo for longer than politeness required, and when she handed it back, her eyes held something that might have been longing. "She has your smile." The observation caught him off guard. People usually commented on how Naomi had Angela's eyes, or Angela's build, or Angela's way of tilting her head when she was thinking. No one ever said she looked like Darius, even though she did. Even though every time he looked at her, he saw his own mother's cheekbones and his father's stubborn chin, and the particular way his family had always held hope and doubt in equal measure. He returned the phone to his pocket, aware that he'd just crossed one of Eva's boundaries by revealing something concrete about his life. But she didn't seem to mind. If anything, she leaned back in her chair with an expression that suggested she was recalibrating, adjusting her assessment of who he was and why he was here. The coffee arrived, steam rising from thick white cups that looked more like bowls than mugs. Darius wrapped his hands around the warmth, grateful for something to hold that wasn't his phone or the menu he couldn't afford. Eva spoke again, her voice quieter now. "My best friend set up my profile. On the app, I mean. She said I needed to meet someone outside my usual circle, someone who didn't know anything about me." Darius picked up on the careful phrasing. "Your friend sounds like she cares about you." Eva nodded, but there was something bitter in the gesture. "She does, maybe too much. She thinks I'm lonely." A pause, then. "She's not wrong. The admission hung between them, brave and unexpected. Darius found himself responding in kind, the words surfacing from a place he usually kept locked. "My neighbor convinced me to try this. She watches Naomi sometimes when I have evening jobs. Keeps telling me that Angela wouldn't want me to turn into a ghost." Eva's eyes met his across the table, and for a moment the restaurant disappeared. It was just the two of them. Two people who'd been stood up by strangers and found something more honest in the wreckage. "Are you," she asked, "a ghost?" The question deserved consideration. Darius thought about his day's wake at 5:30, get Naomi ready for schoolwork, whatever jobs had been scheduled or called in overnight, pick Naomi up, help with homework, make dinner bedtime routine collapse into bed repeat. Weekends meant laundry and grocery shopping and taking Naomi to the library or the park, or the free museums when he could manage the subway fare for both of them. There was no space in that schedule for being a person separate from being a father or a worker. No room for wants that couldn't be justified as needs. He answered honestly, Some days I look in the mirror and I'm surprised I'm still solid, that I haven't just evaporated." Eva's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "I eat dinner alone almost every night, at my desk, with my laptop open and my phone within reach. I tell myself it's because I'm busy, because there's always work to do." She paused, and he watched her gather the courage to finish. "But the truth is, I don't know how to do it any other way anymore. I don't know how to sit across from someone and just talk, without an agenda." The vulnerability in her voice matched his own, and Darius felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't what he'd expected when he'd agreed to a blind date. He'd anticipated awkward small talk, maybe a polite hour of pretending mutual interest before parting ways with vague promises to call. Instead, he'd found someone who understood the specific loneliness of being surrounded by obligations while remaining fundamentally alone. He looked at her, really looked, and saw past the expensive dress and the professional polish to the person underneath. Someone who'd built walls as carefully as he had, who'd learned to protect herself by controlling every variable, who'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen without calculation. The words came out before he could analyze them. "You're doing it now." Eva blinked. "What?" Darius gestured to the space between them, to the coffee cooling in their cups, and the conversation that had spilled out without planning. Sitting across from someone, talking, no agenda. He watched the realization move across her face, watched her posture shift as she recognized the truth in what he'd said. Her laugh, when it came, was surprised and genuine. "I guess I am." They sat with that for a moment, letting the small victory settle. Around them, the restaurant continued its evening performance, but at their table something quieter and more honest was taking place. Two people who'd come looking for a date they'd never wanted, and found instead a mirror for their own carefully hidden loneliness. Eva broke the silence first. "Can I ask you something? And you can tell me if it's crossing a line." Darius nodded, curious where this was heading. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to the register people used for confessions. "Why did you agree to the blind date in the first place, if you knew you weren't ready, or if you didn't really want to be here?" The question was fair, even if it stung a little. Darius took a sip of coffee while he formulated an answer, letting the bitter warmth buy him time. "Naomi asked me if I was lonely. 3 weeks ago, out of nowhere. We were eating breakfast and she just looked up from her cereal and asked." He could still see it, Naomi's spoon hovering halfway to her mouth, milk dripping back into the bowl, her dark eyes fixed on his face with that unnerving directness children possessed. "Are you lonely, Daddy?" The question had gutted him, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. Darius continued, "I tried to tell her no, that we had each other, that we were fine, but she's 7. She sees things adults try to hide, and she said—" His voice caught, and he had to clear his throat. "She said that grown-ups get lonely too, and maybe I should go on a date because that's what people do when they're lonely." Eva's expression softened completely, all pretense of professional distance gone. "She's 7 years old, and she said that—" Darius managed a smile that felt more sad than happy. "She's been worried about me since Angela died. Tries to take care of me the way I take care of her. It's not fair to her, making her carry that. So I thought if I tried this, if I at least made the effort, maybe she'd stop worrying. Maybe I could prove to both of us that I was still capable of being a person." The confession left him feeling exposed, like he'd peeled back skin to reveal something raw underneath. But Eva didn't look away or change the subject, or offer the kind of empty platitudes that people defaulted to when confronted with genuine emotion. She just nodded, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of shared understanding. "My friend Grace, the one who set up my profile, she said almost the same thing, that I'd stopped being a person and turned into a function, that people knew what I could do for them, but no one knew who I was." Eva's fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup in slow circles. I didn't believe her at first. I thought I was just focused, disciplined. But then I tried to remember the last time I did something that had nothing to do with work or obligation, and I couldn't. Every conversation is transactional. Every relationship serves a purpose. I don't have friends. I have contacts. The parallel between them was almost painful in its clarity. Two people who'd lost themselves in different ways, one to grief and duty, one to ambition and isolation, both trying to figure out if there was anything left underneath the roles they'd built. Darius found himself saying, maybe that's why we're both here. Not for the dates that didn't show up, but because we needed to remember what it feels like to just be. Eva met his eyes, and something passed between them that felt like recognition. Like two people who'd been speaking different languages, suddenly discovering they shared a native tongue. You're not what I expected, she said quietly. He raised an eyebrow. What did you expect? She considered the question, and he could see her choosing words carefully. Someone who wanted something from me. Everyone always wants something. The statement was matter-of-fact, without self-pity, but it revealed more than she probably intended. Darius filed the information away, adding it to his growing understanding of who Eva was beneath the surface she presented. I don't even know enough about you to want anything specific. That was your rule. A smile tugged at her lips. It was, wasn't it? She paused, then asked, do you regret it? Coming here tonight? Darius thought about the question seriously. He thought about the borrowed suit jacket, and the subway ride from Brooklyn, and the hour he'd spent sitting alone feeling like an idiot. He thought about Naomi waiting at home with her spacebook, and Mrs. Hartford trying to fill the gap he'd left. He thought about all the reasons this had been a terrible idea. Then he thought about the last 30 minutes, about the conversation that had happened without performance or pretense, about feeling seen by someone who had no reason to see him except that they'd both been abandoned in the same place at the same time. He answered, no, I don't regret it. Eva's smile widened, and the transformation was startling. For a moment, he saw past the armor to something younger and more open the person she might have been before life taught her to guard herself. Neither do I. They ordered food after that, simple things that wouldn't require explanation or apology. Eva got a salad that cost more than Darius usually spent on groceries for a week. He ordered pasta, the least expensive entree on the menu, and tried not to think about the total climbing with each decision. The conversation shifted, finding lighter ground. Eva talked about her friend Grace without revealing what Grace did or where they'd met, painting a picture of someone loyal and exasperated in equal measure. Darius told stories about Naomi, her questions about black holes, her theory that cats were actually aliens gathering intelligence, her complete devastation when she learned Pluto had been demoted from planet status. Somewhere between the salad and the pasta, Darius's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and saw Mrs. Hartford's name followed by a photo. Naomi in her pajamas holding up a drawing she'd made. Tell your dad I drew the solar system. There are 8 planets now, not 9, because Pluto is a dwarf planet, and that's scientifically accurate. He showed the photo to Eva without thinking, and watched her face soften as she read Naomi's message. She's wonderful, Eva said, and there was real longing in her voice. You're lucky. The word felt strange applied to his life. Lucky suggested winning something, getting more than you deserved. But looking at Naomi's gap-toothed smile in the photo, he supposed lucky was accurate. He'd lost Angela, lost the future they'd planned, lost pieces of himself he'd never get back. But he had Naomi, and that was enough to build a life around, even if the life was smaller and harder than he'd imagined. He typed back quickly. That's amazing. Tell Mrs. Hartford I'll be home in 45 minutes to read 2 chapters. Eva watched him text, and when he looked up, she asked, Do you need to go? The question wasn't accusatory, just practical. They both had lives waiting outside this restaurant, responsibilities that couldn't be postponed indefinitely. But Darius found he didn't want to leave yet. This felt too rare, too unexpected to abandon before it had fully formed. I have 45 minutes, he said. You? Eva checked her own phone, scrolling through what looked like dozens of notifications with an expression that cycled between resignation and fatigue. I should go, she admitted, but I don't want to. The honesty of it made Darius brave. Then don't. Stay until you have to leave. We both got stood up. We might as well make the most of it. She looked at him across the table, and he saw her making a calculation, weighing the cost of staying against the cost of leaving. Finally, she set her phone face down on the tablecloth, a deliberate gesture of commitment, and said, Okay, but I need to tell you something first. Darius felt his stomach tighten. Here it comes, he thought. The reveal, The thing that would make sense of why someone like her was having dinner with someone like him. All right. Eva took a breath, and he could see her gathering courage. Earlier when I said no questions about work, that was because what I do, it changes how people see me. It makes them want things, or makes them jealous, or makes them treat me like I'm not quite real. He waited, giving her space to continue. She met his eyes. I run a company, a big one. I'm the CEO and founder, and I'm... She paused, clearly, struggling with how much to reveal. I'm successful. Very successful. And that usually means men either run away or try to use me. The confession explained the expensive dress, the careful boundaries, the way she'd structured their conversation to avoid anything that might reveal her position. Darius processed this information, feeling pieces of the puzzle click into place. The scars on her hands, keyboard and mouse, not manual labor. The way she assessed everything with strategic precision. The loneliness that came from being at the top with no one to share the view. He responded carefully. And you're telling me this because... Eva's laugh was short and slightly bitter. Because I don't want you to find out later and think I was lying. Because Grace is probably right that I need to stop hiding who I am. And because... She paused, vulnerability flashing across her features. Because you've been honest with me, and I wanted to return the favor. Darius sat with this revelation, turning it over in his mind. He thought about the assumptions he'd made, that she was professional, well-off educated. He'd been right just in magnitudes he hadn't quite grasped. CEO and founder meant she'd built something from nothing, meant she had wealth and power that existed in a completely different sphere from his world of emergency call-outs and late rent payments. It should have mattered, should have created distance or changed the dynamic between them. But looking at her across the table, seeing the fear in her eyes that this information would ruin what they'd started to build, all Darius felt was a strange sense of recognition. He spoke slowly, choosing his words. That must be lonely. Being successful enough that people can't see past it to who you actually are. Eva's eyes widened slightly, and he knew he'd surprised her. Yes, that's exactly what it is. Darius leaned back in his chair, processing. I'm an HVAC technician. I fix heating and air conditioning systems. My annual income is probably what you spend on... He gestured vaguely around the restaurant. I don't know. Shoes? Maybe less. He watched her absorb this, saw her doing her own calculations. They were from completely different worlds, their lives running on parallel tracks that should never have intersected. But they had intersected here in this restaurant, both of them standing in the wreckage of failed dates and finding something more valuable in the debris. Eva's response came quietly. Does that bother you? The difference, Darius considered the question honestly. Did it bother him that she had money and power while he had neither? That she probably lived in a penthouse while he rented a 2-bedroom apartment where the heat sometimes stopped working in winter? That her problems likely involved board meetings and investment decisions, while his involved making rent and keeping Naomi in decent shoes as her feet grew? Yes. And no, he answered. It bothers me that the world is set up that way, that some people have everything while others have to fight for scraps. But you personally, he shook his head. You didn't make me feel less than. You sat here and talked to me like I mattered, like my stories about my daughter and my dead wife and my borrowed suit jacket were worth your time. That's not something money can buy. The words came out rougher than intended, carrying more emotion than he'd planned to reveal. But they were true, and Eva deserved truth after what she'd given him. Her eyes filled with tears, she blinked back quickly, maintaining the composure that was clearly second nature. When she spoke, her voice was thick. Thank you. They sat in that moment, the weight of their mutual recognition settling between them. Two people who'd come looking for one thing and found something entirely different. Something neither of them had known they needed until it appeared. Darius checked his phone. 20 minutes until he had to leave to make it back to Brooklyn in time for bedtime stories. He felt the pull of responsibility, the familiar tug of duty that shaped every decision. But he also felt the pull of this moment, this conversation, this unexpected connection with someone who understood loneliness from a different angle, but with the same depth. Eva must have seen something in his expression because she said, "You need to go soon." He nodded. "Yeah. But before I do..." He paused, unsure how to phrase what he wanted to ask. "Can I get your number? I'd like to do this again. Actually plan it this time instead of both of us being stood up." Eva's smile was small, but genuine. "I'd like that too." She pulled out her phone, and they exchanged numbers with the careful formality of a contract being signed. Darius saved her contact as just Eva, no last name keeping to the rules, even as they moved past them. They split the bill as agreed, and Darius tried not to wince at the number that appeared on his card statement. He'd make it work somehow. Skip a few lunches, take an extra weekend call. Naomi wouldn't go without, and this, whatever this was, felt worth the cost. At the restaurant entrance, they stood facing each other, suddenly awkward now that the evening was ending. Eva broke the silence. "Thank you for talking to me, for seeing me." Darius wanted to say something profound, something that would capture the strange gift they'd given each other. Instead, he settled for simple truth. "Thank you for sitting alone at the table next to mine." She laughed, and the sound was lighter than anything he'd heard from her all evening. They parted there on the sidewalk, Eva heading toward a waiting car that appeared with a single text, Darius, walking toward the subway entrance 2 blocks away. On the train back to Brooklyn, squeezed between a woman with grocery bags and a teenager with headphones. Darius replayed the evening in his mind. He'd been stood up. He'd met a stranger. They'd talked like people who knew each other from another life. And somewhere in that conversation, he'd felt like himself again, not just Naomi's father, or the HVAC guy, or the widower, but Darius, a person with thoughts and feelings and the capacity to connect. His phone buzzed, a text from Eva. "I got home safe. Thank you for tonight. It meant more than you probably realize." He typed back, "Thank you for reminding me what it feels like to be seen." The train rattled through the darkness, carrying him back to Brooklyn, back to Naomi and bedtime stories and the life he'd built from the ruins of the one he'd lost. But something had shifted. Some small crack had appeared in the armor he'd constructed around his heart, and through that crack, possibility leaked in like light. Mrs. Hartford was waiting when he unlocked the apartment door. Naomi had fallen asleep on the couch, the spacebook open across her chest. Mrs. Hartford whispered as she gathered her things, "How was it?" Darius looked at his daughter, at the rise and fall of her breathing, at the way her hand still clutched a colored pencil from whatever drawing she'd been working on. He thought about Eva sitting alone in that restaurant, about the conversation that had saved them both from their separate disappointments. He answered honestly, "Different than I expected. Better." Mrs. Hartford smiled knowingly and patted his arm before leaving. Darius locked the door behind her, then carefully lifted Naomi from the couch, carrying her to her bedroom. She stirred as he tucked her in her eyes, opening just enough to recognize him. "Daddy, you're home." "I'm home, baby girl. Go back to sleep." She mumbled something about planets and closed her eyes again. Darius stood watching her for a moment, feeling the familiar swell of love and responsibility that defined his existence. But underneath that, something new was stirring. A sense that maybe possibly there could be room in his life for more than just survival. In his pocket, his phone held Eva's number. A stranger who wasn't quite a stranger anymore. A woman who'd been stood up at the table beside his and had somehow become the best part of an evening that should have been a disaster. Darius didn't know what would happen next. Didn't know if they'd actually follow through on seeing each other again, or if the magic of their unexpected connection would evaporate in the harsh light of their different realities. But for the first time in 4 years, he felt like trying to find out. He texted her once more before sleep. "Naomi wants to know if you like space. She's very concerned about proper appreciation of planetary science." The response came quickly. "Tell her I think space is fascinating, and Pluto's demotion was a tragedy." Darius smiled at his phone in the darkness of his room, and the smile felt genuine. Tomorrow would bring work and bills and all the familiar struggles, but tonight had brought something unexpected, something that felt like hope, wearing a borrowed suit jacket and sitting alone in an expensive restaurant. And maybe that was enough. Saturday arrived with the kind of cold October rain that turned Brooklyn sidewalks into obstacle courses of puddles and debris. Darius woke to Naomi bouncing on his bed, her energy undimmed by the weather, or the fact that it was barely past 7 in the morning. She wanted pancakes. She wanted to go to the park despite the rain. She wanted to know if the lady from last night, the one who thought Pluto's demotion was tragic, was going to be his girlfriend. He deflected the last question while making breakfast, focusing on the familiar rhythm of mixing batter and heating the griddle. His phone sat on the counter, silent but magnetic. Eva hadn't texted again after their exchange about planetary science, and he wasn't sure if he should reach out first or wait. The rules of engagement felt murky, especially when the engagement had started with both of them being abandoned by other people. Naomi drowned her pancakes in syrup while interrogating him about the date that wasn't really a date. Her questions had the relentless quality of a prosecuting attorney who'd learned her craft from watching too many courtroom dramas on the weekends when Darius was too tired to monitor screen time properly. "But did you like her?" Darius flipped another pancake, buying time. "I did. We had a good conversation." "What did you talk about?" "Different things." Work, life, you, actually. Naomi's eyes lit up with the particular brightness that came from being the center of attention. You told her about me. What did you say? He slid the finished pancakes onto her plate, then sat down with his own considerably smaller stack. I told her you're the smartest 7-year-old in Brooklyn, and possibly the entire tri-state area, that you want to be an astronaut or a physicist and you're very serious about scientific accuracy. Did she think that was cool? The question held more weight than a child's voice should carry. Naomi was asking if this stranger had approved of her, if Darius's description had painted her as someone worth knowing. He recognized the insecurity because he felt it himself, the constant low-grade anxiety that came from being black in spaces that weren't built for you, the need to prove you deserved to exist, in rooms that made it clear you were unexpected. She thought you were remarkable, he told his daughter, and watched relief flood her features. They spent the morning cleaning the apartment, Naomi's room first, where toys and books had achieved a kind of chaotic equilibrium that she insisted was actually a very logical system. Darius had learned not to argue. He vacuumed while she sorted, listening to her narrate the process, like she was documenting an archaeological dig. His phone finally buzzed around 11. A text from Eva. I have a strange request. Can we meet today? Not a date. I need to talk to you about something. The message carried an urgency that made his stomach tighten. He typed back, Is everything okay? Her response came immediately, I don't know. Can you meet at 6 p.m. Central Park near Bethesda Fountain? Darius looked at Naomi, who was currently building what she claimed was a scale model of the International Space Station out of cardboard boxes and duct tape. He thought about Mrs. Hartford, who'd already watched her last night, thought about the favor he'd be asking, the debt he'd be accumulating. Then he thought about the urgency in Eva's text, the way she'd phrased it as needing to talk rather than wanting to see him. Something was wrong. And despite having known her for less than 24 hours, he felt responsible for showing up. He texted back, I'll be there, but I need to bring my daughter. Is that okay? The 3 dots appeared and disappeared twice before her response arrived. Of course, I'd like to meet her. Mrs. Hartford agreed to come over and watch Naomi until Darius could figure out logistics, her eyes twinkling with the knowing look of someone who'd lived long enough to recognize the early stages of something significant. She arrived with a bag of knitting and a willingness to be complicit in whatever was developing. But when Darius explained that Eva wanted to meet and that he was considering bringing Naomi, Mrs. Hartford's expression shifted to something more serious. She pulled him aside while Naomi was occupied with her space station. Are you sure about this, letting her meet someone so soon? The question was fair. Darius had been careful about the people he allowed into Naomi's orbit, protective, in the way single parents learned to be when their children had already lost one person who promised forever. But something in Eva's message felt different from romance or casual dating. It felt like distress. I think she needs help, he found himself saying. And I don't know why, but I think I'm supposed to show up. Mrs. Hartford studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. Trust your instincts. They've kept you and that child safe this long. By 5:30, Darius and Naomi were on the subway heading into Manhattan. Naomi wore her favorite dress, purple, with planets printed across the fabric, a gift from Angela's mother that was getting too small, but that she refused to abandon. She'd insisted on bringing her spacebook, convinced that Eva would want to discuss the finer points of gravitational pull and orbital mechanics. The rain had stopped, leaving the city washed and gleaming. Central Park emerged from the subway like a different world, green and sprawling despite the urban geometry that surrounded it. Naomi gripped Darius's hand as they navigated the paths, her excitement about meeting Eva mixing with the natural shyness she displayed around new adults. They found Eva standing near Bethesda Fountain exactly at 6. She'd dressed down from last night, jeans and a sweater that probably cost more than Darius's monthly rent, but looked casual enough to pass for normal. Her hair was different too, pulled back in a simple ponytail that made her look younger, more vulnerable. Naomi froze when she spotted Eva, suddenly aware that this was the woman from the restaurant, the one who might become important. Darius felt his daughter's hand tighten in his own, and he squeezed back reassurance. Eva saw them and walked over, her smile genuine but strained. She crouched down to Naomi's level, a gesture that immediately earned points in Darius's mental ledger. You must be Naomi. Your dad told me you're an expert on space. Naomi's shyness evaporated in the face of her favorite subject. I'm not an expert yet, but I'm studying. Did you know that Saturn has 82 moons, and they keep finding more? Eva's laugh sounded real this time, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. I did not know that. No. That's incredible. They walked while they talked, Naomi between them, chattering about the solar system with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found a willing audience. Eva asked questions that proved she was actually listening, not just performing interest, and Darius watched his daughter bloom under the attention. But he also watched Eva, noting the way her eyes kept scanning their surroundings, the tension in her jaw that suggested she was grinding her teeth. Something was definitely wrong. After 20 minutes of planetary discussion, Naomi spotted a playground and looked up at Darius with pleading eyes. He glanced at Eva, who nodded. "Go ahead," he told his daughter. "Stay where I can see you." Naomi took off toward the swings, her spacebook clutched under one arm like a talisman. Darius and Eva sat on a bench within sight of the playground, the fountain's spray creating a backdrop of white noise that offered a strange kind of privacy. Eva spoke without preamble. "I need to tell you something, and you're going to think I'm paranoid or dramatic, but I need you to hear me out." Darius turned to face her fully, giving her his complete attention. "Okay." She took a breath, and he could see her organizing thoughts with the precision of someone used to high-stakes presentations. "After I left the restaurant last night, I went back to my office. I know I said I was going home, but old habits. Anyway, I was reviewing some financial reports for the company routine stuff I do every weekend." She paused, and Darius waited. "I found a discrepancy. $12 million moved from our operating accounts to offshore holdings that I didn't authorize. It's buried in layers of legitimate transactions, but it's there." Her hands twisted together in her lap. "Someone is stealing from my company, and they're good enough at it that I almost didn't notice." The information landed like a physical weight. Darius knew nothing about corporate finance beyond balancing his own meager checking account, but $12 million sounded like the kind of theft that ended careers and triggered federal investigations. "Did you call the police, the FBI?" Eva shook her head. "Not yet. Because here's the thing, the transfers were authorized using my login credentials. As far as the system is concerned, I made those transactions. If I go to the authorities now, I'm either the thief or incompetent enough to let someone use my access for months without noticing." "How long has this been happening?" "Based on what I found last night, at least 2 years, maybe longer." She finally met his eyes, and he saw fear there beneath the professional composure. "I have a board meeting Monday morning. If they've found this too, if someone else runs those reports before I can figure out who's behind it, I'll be finished. And my CFO, Silas Whitmore, he's been pushing for more financial oversight. If he discovers this first, he'll use it to force me out." The mention of her CFO was the first concrete detail she'd given about her professional life. Darius filed it away, adding it to his growing understanding of the forces arrayed against her. "Why are you telling me this?" Eva's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Because everyone in my world has an agenda. Every conversation is about leverage or position. But you—" She gestured vaguely between them. "You have no reason to care about TechVance Solutions or my board or any of this. Which means you're the only person I can trust to tell me the truth without trying to use it against me." The logic was sound in a twisted way. Darius existed completely outside her sphere of influence, which made him safe by virtue of irrelevance. The thought should have stung, but instead he felt oddly honored. She was trusting him with information that could destroy her, and real trust, not the performance of it, was rare enough to be precious. From the playground, Naomi's laughter rang out as she mastered some new feat on the monkey bars. The sound grounded him, reminding him that whatever drama existed in Eva's world, his primary responsibility remained the 7-year-old who was currently hanging upside down and waving at him. He waved back, then returned his attention to Eva. "What do you need from me?" She seemed surprised by the question, like she'd expected him to make excuses and leave. "Honestly, I don't know. Maybe just someone to talk to who isn't going to immediately start calculating how this affects their stock options or position in the company." Darius understood that need in his bones, the desire for a witness who had no stake in the outcome beyond basic human decency. "Okay, so let's think through this logically. Who has access to your login credentials?" Eva considered. "Silas, my CFO, my executive assistant Rebecca, the IT department head Martin, and technically the board could request access if they had cause." "Do you trust any of them?" The question made her pause, and Darius watched her mental calculations play out across her features. Finally, she answered, "I trust Grace, my lawyer. She's not on that list, though. Everyone else." She trailed off, the implication clear. "So someone you work with closely enough to have access is stealing from you, and you can't go to the authorities without implicating yourself." Darius rubbed his face, feeling the weight of the problem. "That's a hell of a corner to be backed into." "Yeah." Eva's voice was small, nothing like the confident woman from the restaurant. "I built this company from nothing. Spent 15 years turning it into something that matters, something that employs 300 people and actually makes a difference in financial technology. And now someone is gutting it from the inside while wearing my face." The pain in her words was visceral. Darius thought about what it would feel like to have someone destroy the thing you'd built, to watch your life's work crumble while being powerless to stop it. He thought about Angela's death, how cancer had stolen her cell by cell while he watched helplessly. Different scenarios, same fundamental agony of witnessing destruction you couldn't prevent. He spoke carefully. Can you trace where the money went? Follow the transactions backward. I tried last night. It disappears into shell corporations and offshore accounts. I'd need forensic accountants and probably the FBI to track it fully. She laughed bitterly. Which brings us back to the problem of me being the prime suspect.
Naomi appeared at Darius's elbow, interrupting the conversation. Daddy, can Eva come to dinner with us, please?
The request caught him off guard. He glanced at Eva, who looked equally surprised. Sweetheart, I don't know if Eva has plans. I don't... Eva cut in quickly, too quickly, like she was grabbing for a lifeline. I'd love to have dinner with you both, if that's okay. Naomi beamed, victory achieved through persistence. Darius felt control of the situation slipping away, but couldn't quite bring himself to care. Eva needed something beyond advice. She needed to step out of the nightmare her life had become for a few hours. And if he could provide that with pizza and his daughter's enthusiasm, maybe that was worth something. They ended up at a small pizza place in Brooklyn, the kind of neighborhood joint where the owner knew Darius by name and always gave Naomi extra garlic knots. The space was cramped and loud, nothing like the elegant restaurant where they'd met, but Eva seemed to relax in the chaos. She let Naomi choose the toppings, pepperoni and mushrooms, a combination that made culinary sense only to a 7-year-old, and listened with apparent fascination to Naomi's explanation of why pizza was scientifically the perfect food. Watching them interact, Darius felt something shift in his chest. Eva wasn't performing interest or checking her phone every 30 seconds. She was present, engaged, asking follow-up questions about Naomi's theory regarding optimal cheese distribution. And Naomi, who usually took months to warm up to new people, was treating Eva like a friend she'd simply misplaced and recently found again. The pizza arrived, and they ate with the unself-conscious pleasure of people who were genuinely hungry. Eva had a smear of sauce on her chin that she didn't notice until Naomi pointed it out with a giggle, and the moment of embarrassment humanized her in a way that made Darius's heart do something complicated and inconvenient. After dinner, they walked back to Darius's apartment building. The neighborhood probably looked rough to someone from Eva's world, graffitied walls and chain-link fences, buildings that sagged under the weight of deferred maintenance. But it was home, and Darius had long ago stopped apologizing for where he lived. Eva didn't seem to notice or care about the surroundings. She held Naomi's hand while Naomi narrated their journey, pointing out landmarks that mattered only to children: the bodega, where the cat sat in the window, the fire hydrant that always leaked, the spot where she'd once seen a bird's nest. At the building entrance, Darius hesitated. Inviting Eva upstairs felt like crossing a threshold, letting her see the full reality of his life. The apartment was clean but shabby, filled with second-hand furniture and the accumulated debris of a childhood in progress. It announced his financial situation in ways that no amount of borrowed suits could hide. But Eva was looking at him with an expression that suggested she'd already seen past the performance to the reality underneath, and refusing her entry now would be more insulting than any revelation about his living conditions. You want to come up? Naomi needs to get ready for bed, but we could talk more about your situation. Eva nodded, and they climbed 3 flights of stairs because the elevator had been broken for 2 weeks and the landlord was taking his time about repairs. Naomi bounded ahead, already planning her bedtime routine to maximize time with their guest. The apartment revealed itself in sections as Darius unlocked the door. Small living room with a couch that had been new when Clinton was president. Kitchen barely large enough for 1 person, let alone 2. Hallway leading to 2 bedrooms, one of which was really more of a large closet that they'd converted for Naomi. Eva took it all in without comment, and Darius couldn't read her expression. Then she smiled, small and genuine, and said the last thing he expected. It feels like a home. Mine just feels like a place I sleep between work. The words diffused tension he didn't realize he'd been carrying. Naomi grabbed Eva's hand and dragged her on a tour, showing off her room with its glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to the ceiling and her collection of library books about space. Eva asked questions about the constellation patterns Naomi had attempted to replicate, and his daughter glowed under the attention. Bath time came next, and Darius left Eva in the living room while he supervised Naomi's increasingly elaborate stalling tactics. His daughter wanted to know everything about Eva. Was she nice? Was she smart? Did she like pizza? Did she want to see Naomi's telescope, a cheap plastic thing from a yard sale that barely worked but was Naomi's prized possession? She seems very nice, Darius confirmed while wrestling his daughter into pajamas. But remember, she's my friend, not anything else. Okay. Naomi gave him a look that suggested she understood far more than a 7-year-old should about the nuances of adult relationships. "Mom would like her," she declared with the certainty of someone who'd never actually known her mother, but had constructed an idealized version from stories and photographs. The comment hit Darius square in the chest. Angela had been dead for 4 years, and Naomi's memories of her were sparse at best. But she'd built an entire mythology around the mother she'd lost, and now she was inviting Eva into that sacred space.
The generosity of it, the willingness to make room for someone new without feeling like betrayal, it humbled him. "Yeah," he managed his throat tight. "I think she would." When they emerged from the bedroom, Eva was examining the photos on the living room wall. Pictures of Naomi at various ages. One of Angela holding a newborn Naomi, her smile bright, despite the exhaustion in her eyes. A family photo from Naomi's 2nd birthday, the last one they'd taken together before the diagnosis. Eva turned when she heard them, and Darius saw understanding in her expression. She'd pieced together the story from the images filled in the gaps between what he'd told her and what the photographs revealed. "She was beautiful," Eva said quietly, nodding toward Angela's picture. She was. Darius moved to stand beside her, looking at the face he'd loved for 10 years and lost too soon. "Naomi doesn't remember much about her. I try to keep her alive through stories, but stories aren't the same as having her here." The statement held no pity, just acknowledgement of an unfair reality. Darius appreciated that more than he could express. He'd grown tired of people's sympathy the way they tried to find silver linings in loss or suggest that time would heal everything. Eva didn't do that. She just stood with him in the truth of it. Naomi interrupted, demanding that Eva see her telescope. They went to Naomi's room, and Darius watched while his daughter attempted to show Eva the moon through the window. The plastic lenses were too poor to reveal much beyond a bright blur, but Eva responded with appropriate wonder, and Naomi was satisfied. Reading time came next, and Naomi insisted Eva stay for the bedtime chapter. They crowded onto Naomi's bed, Darius reading while Naomi and Eva listened, the 3 of them pressed together in the small space. The book was about a girl who built a rocket ship from household items and launched herself toward Mars. Naomi knew it by heart, but never tired of hearing it. Halfway through the chapter, Darius glanced over and saw tears on Eva's face. Silent tears that she wiped away quickly, but not before he noticed. He kept reading, giving her privacy for whatever grief or longing the moment had triggered. When the chapter ended, Naomi was already half asleep. They tiptoed out, leaving her nightlight on, and her door cracked open the way she liked. In the living room, Eva sank onto the couch like her legs had given out. "I'm sorry," she said without looking at him. "I didn't mean to. It's just been a long time since I felt like I was part of something, instead of just watching other people have what I don't." Darius sat in the armchair across from her, giving her space. "What don't you have?" Eva gestured vaguely around the apartment. "This. Family. Connection. Someone who needs you for reasons that have nothing to do with what you can do for them." She finally met his eyes. "Naomi loves you." Really loves you. Not because you're successful or powerful, but because you're her dad, and you show up. That's something I've never had." The confession opened a window into Eva's childhood, the shape of losses that had nothing to do with death, but everything to do with absence. Darius wanted to know more, wanted to understand what had formed her into someone who built walls so high she couldn't see over them herself. But pushing felt wrong, so he offered his own truth instead. "It's not always enough, though. Being there, showing up. Some days I look at her and think about everything I can't give her, the opportunities she's missing because I can't afford better schools or tutors or any of the things that would help her actually become an astronaut instead of just dreaming about it." Eva's expression sharpened with something like anger, though not directed at him. "You're giving her the thing that matters most. You're teaching her that she's worth someone's full attention and care. That's the foundation everything else gets built on." The conviction in her voice suggested she was speaking from personal experience, from the absence of that foundation in her own life. Darius filed the information away, adding it to his growing understanding of who Eva was beneath the CEO exterior. They talked for another hour, the conversation drifting between Eva's corporate crisis and Darius's challenges as a single father. Eva asked questions about HVAC work that most people would have found boring, genuinely interested in the technical aspects of systems and troubleshooting. Darius found himself explaining the satisfaction of fixing something broken, making a building comfortable again, solving problems that had clear solutions. Around 10, Eva's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and her face went pale. "It's Silas, my CFO. He wants to meet tomorrow Sunday to discuss urgent financial matters.
Darius felt his stomach drop.
That's not good.
No.
Eva stared at the message like it might spontaneously combust. He knows, or he's the one doing it, and he's getting ready to cover his tracks. What are you going to tell him? Eva's fingers hovered over the keyboard, paralyzed by the weight of the decision. Finally, she typed, "Tomorrow afternoon works. My office at 2 p.m. She looked up at Darius. I don't know what I'm doing. I should have lawyers present, but if I bring Grace, Silas will know I suspect something. And if I meet him alone—" The unfinished sentence hung between them, dark with implication. A woman alone with a man who might be a thief, who definitely had reasons to want her silenced. The situation felt dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with Darius's expertise or experience. But Eva was looking at him like he might have answers, and something in him couldn't stand the fear in her eyes.
He heard himself saying, "What if you're not alone? What if someone else is there? Not obviously, but close enough to help if things go wrong." Eva processed this. "You mean like hidden, listening?" "Not hidden exactly, just nearby. I could be there working on the HVAC system. I'm a technician. No one questions a technician with tools. And if something happens, if you need backup, I'm right there." The plan was probably stupid, definitely outside his scope of experience. But Eva was nodding slowly, hope replacing some of the fear. "You'd do that. Risk getting involved in something that could blow up your whole life." Darius thought about the question seriously. Thought about Naomi sleeping in the next room, about his responsibilities, and the very real danger of entangling himself in corporate crime. Thought about all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Then he thought about Eva sitting in that restaurant alone, about the conversation that had saved them both from their separate disappointments. Thought about the way she'd listened to Naomi's theories about pizza and looked at Angela's picture with understanding instead of pity. Thought about trust, real trust, and how rarely it appeared between strangers. "Yeah," he said simply. "I'd do that." Eva crossed the space between them and hugged him, sudden and fierce, her face pressed against his shoulder. He could feel her trembling fear and relief tangled together in the embrace. He hugged back carefully, aware that this was the first time they'd touched beyond a handshake, aware that it meant something he didn't have words for yet. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet again, but her expression had steel in it. "Thank you. For tonight. For Naomi. For agreeing to this insane plan. For seeing me." Those last words echoed his own text from the night before, and Darius realized they'd been doing the same thing for each other, making each other visible, present, real. In a world that reduced people to functions and roles, they'd stumbled into something more fundamental. Eva left shortly after calling a car from an app that summoned luxury vehicles at midnight, like magic. Darius watched from the window as she got in, saw her look back up at his building before the car pulled away. The gesture felt like a promise or a question, and he wasn't sure which interpretation scared him more. Sleep came hard that night. He lay in bed thinking about Eva's situation, about the meeting with Silas, about the terrible plan he'd agreed to. Thought about Naomi and the life he'd built that was stable, if not comfortable, safe, if not exciting. Thought about what he was risking by getting involved in Eva's corporate drama. But mostly he thought about the way Naomi had held Eva's hand in the park, the way Eva had cried during the bedtime story, the way they'd sat together on the couch like three people who'd found something precious in the wreckage of separate disappointments. His phone buzzed around midnight, Eva's name on the screen, and he opened the message. "I can't remember the last time I felt like I belonged somewhere. Thank you for tonight." Darius typed back, "You're welcome here, anytime." The response came almost immediately. "That's the nicest thing anyone's said to me in years." He wanted to tell her that was tragic, that someone with her success and intelligence and capacity for connection should have people lining up to make her feel welcome. But he understood too, knew how loneliness could exist in the middle of crowds, how you could be surrounded by people who knew your name but didn't know you. Sleep finally found him around 2 in the morning, and when it did, he dreamed of elevators and glass towers, and a woman with grey eyes asking him to save her from something he didn't understand. Sunday morning arrived grey and uncertain. Darius made breakfast while Naomi complained about being hungry, about the rain that had returned, about everything with the irritability of a child who'd stayed up too late. He got her settled with cartoons and cereal, then texted Eva, "What time should I get there?" Her response came 20 minutes later. 1:30. "I'll have facilities add you to the weekend access list. 7th floor. There's a conference room next to my office. You can work there. I'll make sure there's actual HVAC work logged so it looks legitimate." Darius appreciated the attention to detail.
Eva was thinking like someone who understood that the small things mattered, that one wrong move could unravel everything. He texted back, "I'll be there. Mrs."
Hartford arrived at noon to watch Naomi, her expression more serious than usual. She'd seen the news something about tech advanced solutions and financial irregularities, though nothing concrete had been reported yet. "You be careful," she told Darius as he gathered his tools. "That world up there, it's not like ours. People play for keeps." He promised to be careful, kissed Naomi goodbye, and took the subway into Manhattan with a toolkit that felt heavier than it should. Tech Advanced Solutions occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in Midtown. Darius arrived carrying his equipment, wearing coveralls that marked him as service personnel. Eva met him in the lobby, her professional mask firmly in place, but her eyes grateful. She handed him a visitor badge and a work order she'd created. 7th floor HVAC maintenance. The facilities manager added you to the access list. You'll be in the conference room next to my office. They rode the elevator in silence, surrounded by mirrors that reflected their images back in infinite regression. Darius, in his work clothes, Eva in a tailored suit that probably cost what he made in a month. They looked like people from different universes, and maybe they were. The 7th floor was deserted, except for weekend security. Eva showed him to the conference room, a glass-walled space with a view of the city that made his knees weak. "You'll be able to see into my office through this window. If I need you, I'll put my hand on the back of my neck, like this." She demonstrated the gesture, and Darius committed it to memory. "And if things go really wrong..." Eva's expression went dark. "Then break the glass and get me out of there." She meant it. Darius could see the genuine fear underneath her corporate composure, the terror of meeting with someone who might want to hurt her. He wanted to tell her to call the whole thing off to bring in professionals who actually knew what they were doing, but her jaw was set with determination, and he recognized the look of someone who'd made a decision and would see it through regardless of consequences. "I'll be here," he promised, and she squeezed his hand briefly before heading to her office. Darius made a show of checking the HVAC vents in the conference room, actually doing some basic inspection work to justify his presence. But mostly he watched through the glass as Eva sat at her desk, organizing papers and preparing for confrontation. Silas Whitmore arrived at exactly 2 p.m. Darius saw him exit the elevator, a white man in his early 40s wearing a suit that screamed money and authority. He moved with the confidence of someone who belonged in these spaces, who'd never had to prove his right to occupy them. Eva stood to greet him, and Darius watched their interaction through 2 layers of glass. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but body language told its own story. Silas's posture was aggressive, leaning forward in his chair. Eva sat back, arms crossed defensively. The conversation was not going well. 10 minutes in, Silas pulled out a folder and slid it across Eva's desk. She opened it, and Darius saw her face go white. Whatever was in that folder, it was bad. Career-ending bad. Eva's hand went to the back of her neck. Darius was moving before he consciously decided to leaving his tools and crossing to Eva's office. He knocked once and entered without waiting for permission, channeling every ounce of working-class authority he'd learned from years of being questioned in spaces where he was expected to be invisible. "Ms. Sinclair, sorry to interrupt, but I need to get access to the vent in here. Won't take more than 5 minutes." His voice came out steady, despite his heart attempting to break his ribs from the inside. For a second, no one moved. Silas staring at this unexpected intrusion, while Eva's gratitude flickered quick before vanishing into professional irritation she wore like camouflage. "Fine, make it quick." Darius grabbed the stepladder he'd positioned in the hallway earlier, bringing it into the office and setting it up beneath the ceiling vent. He climbed, unscrewing the cover with deliberate slowness while his ears strained to catch the conversation resuming below. Silas's voice carried an edge of barely controlled anger. "As I was saying, these transactions clearly show you've been moving money out of the company. 12 million over 2 years, Eva. The board is going to want answers." Eva's response was ice. "Those transactions were made using my credentials, yes, but I didn't authorize them. Someone is framing me, Silas, and I think you know who." "Are you accusing me?" Silas laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I'm the one who discovered this." "I could have gone straight to the board, but I'm giving you a chance to explain first. That's more courtesy than you deserve." Darius worked slowly, keeping his movements quiet, making himself invisible the way service workers learn to do. Through the vent, he could see Silas's reflection in the window, his face flushed, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. Eva's voice stayed level. "The transactions route through shell corporations that can't be traced. Very sophisticated. The kind of thing that would require someone with deep knowledge of our financial systems, someone like a CFO. Or a CEO trying to cover her tracks." Silas stood abruptly,
and Darius tensed on the ladder. "I'm calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. You can explain this to them. And Eva, I'd start looking for a good lawyer." He stormed out, leaving Eva alone at her desk. Darius climbed down from the ladder, and when Eva looked at him, her expression was equal parts devastated and furious. "He's going to the board, tomorrow morning." Her voice shook. "I have maybe 12 hours to find proof that he's behind this, or my career is over." Darius set down his tools carefully. "Then we'd better get started." Eva pulled up the financial records on her desktop, and Darius moved his chair beside hers so they could both see the screen. The numbers meant nothing to him, rows and columns of transactions, account numbers, timestamps. But Eva navigated through them with the practiced ease of someone who'd built her literacy in this language. "Look here," she said, pointing to a series of transfers dated 3 months ago. "Every transaction happens between midnight and 2 a.m. on Friday nights, when the office is empty, when I'm never here." Darius leaned closer, studying the pattern. "Could someone remote in access the system from home?" "Yes, but it would leave a digital trail, IP addresses, login times." Eva opened another window, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "I checked last night. All the logins show as coming from inside the building, from my office computer specifically." "So someone was physically here, in your office, using your login? Which means they either have my password or they bypassed it somehow." Eva sat back, frustration evident in every line of her body. "I change my password every month, use complex strings. There's no way Silas could guess it." Darius thought about the problem from a different angle, applying the troubleshooting logic he used for HVAC systems. When something wasn't working, you traced backward from the failure point until you found the break in the chain. What if he didn't guess it? What if he's recording it somehow? Eva turned to look at him. "A keylogger." "Is that what it's called? Something that tracks what you type?" "Yeah." Eva was already moving, dropping to her knees and checking the cables behind her computer. "Physical keyloggers are small. They fit between the keyboard cable and the computer. If Silas planted one, he'd have access to everything I type." She found nothing on the desktop. Then she checked her laptop, the one she used for working from home. Still nothing. Darius watched her search grow more frantic, checking outlets, USB ports, even the underside of her desk. "It's not here," she said finally, defeat creeping into her voice. "Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe—" "What about your old equipment?" Darius interrupted. "If you replaced your computer in the last 2 years, where did the old one go?" Eva froze. "ET surplus. We donate old equipment to schools after wiping the drives." She stood abruptly, heading for the door. "The storage room is on the 5th floor. If Silas planted a keylogger on my old computer and I used it for even a month before the replacement, he'd have my password." They took the elevator down 2 floors. The storage room was locked, but Eva's executive access badge opened it. Inside, boxes of equipment sat stacked on metal shelving monitors, keyboards, cables, all waiting to be donated or recycled. "Help me look for anything labeled with my name or office number," Eva said, already pulling boxes down. They searched for 20 minutes, opening boxes and checking labels. Darius found it wedged in the back, a tower computer with a tag reading E. Sinclair, 7th floor, replaced March 2024, 6 months ago. Eva powered it on, and while they waited for it to boot, she checked the keyboard cable. Her hands stilled when she found it, a small black device no bigger than a thumb drive connected between the keyboard and the USB port. "There," she breathed. "That's how he did it." Darius felt a surge of vindication mixed with dread. They had evidence, but evidence of what? That someone had planted a keylogger on Eva's old computer. It didn't prove Silas had done it. Didn't prove he'd stolen $12 million. Eva must have been thinking the same thing, because she said, "This isn't enough. Any half-decent lawyer would argue that anyone could have planted this, that I could have planted it myself to create reasonable doubt." "But it's a start," Darius countered. "It proves someone was stealing your passwords, and you said all the fraudulent logins came from your office computer. If we can prove Silas had access to your office when you weren't here." "Building security logs." Eva was already moving, pulling out her phone. "Every entry and exit is recorded. If Silas was here during those late-night transfers, there'll be a record." She called the weekend security supervisor, identifying herself and requesting access to the logs for the past 2 years. The supervisor hesitated. It was irregular, he said, to request that much historical data on a Sunday, but Eva's authority carried weight even over the phone. They returned to her office to wait, and Darius made coffee in the small break room while Eva paced. His phone buzzed with a text from Naomi via Mrs. Hartford's phone. "When are you coming home?" "We're making cookies, and I want you to try them." He texted back, "Soon, baby girl. Save me the ones with the most chocolate chips." "Is she okay?" Eva asked, watching him put his phone away. "She's making cookies, probably eating more dough than actually makes it into the oven." Darius handed Eva a mug of coffee. "You should eat something. When's the last time you had a meal?" Eva looked at the coffee like she'd forgotten food was a thing people needed. "Yesterday, the pizza with you and Naomi." Darius pulled out his phone and ordered sandwiches from a deli that delivered on Sundays. Eva tried to protest. He shouldn't be spending money on her. She could expense it. She wasn't even hungry. But he ignored her, the way he ignored Naomi's similar protests about bedtime. The sandwiches arrived 30 minutes later, and they ate at Eva's desk while reviewing the documents Silas had shown her. The evidence against her was damning transaction records, authorization codes, all bearing the digital signature of her credentials. To an outside observer, it looked exactly like what Silas claimed systematic embezzlement by the CEO. "He's smart," Eva admitted, taking a bite of her sandwich. "He's been planning this for years, building a case against me while stealing the money himself. When the board sees this tomorrow, they'll have no choice but to remove me. And once I'm gone, Silas slides into the CEO position and no one thinks to investigate further." "Unless we prove it was him," Darius said. "The security logs might not show anything." "Silas is smart enough to cover his tracks. He could have had someone else come in, could have spoofed the access records." Eva set down her half-eaten sandwich, appetite gone. "I think I need to accept that I might lose everything tomorrow." The resignation in her voice sparked something in Darius, the same stubborn refusal to accept defeat that had kept him going through Angela's illness, through the aftermath, through 4 years of single parenthood that sometimes felt like drowning. "No," he said flatly. "We're not giving up. There's something we're missing, something Silas didn't account for." Eva looked at him with an expression caught between hope and despair. "Like what?" Darius stood moving to the window. The city sprawled below them, millions of people living millions of lives, most of them unconcerned with corporate fraud or billionaire CEOs. But somewhere in the machinery of this building there was a clue. There had to be. "Cameras," he said suddenly. "You have security cameras in the building, right? In the lobbies and elevators, not on the individual floors, privacy concerns. But the elevator cameras would show who was coming and going. If Silas was here late at night, there'd be footage of him getting on the elevator to the 7th floor. Eva grabbed her phone, calling security again. This time she requested access to the elevator camera footage for the dates of the fraudulent transactions. The supervisor was more hesitant. Video archives required a formal request, usually went through legal, but Eva pulled rank with the kind of authority that made it clear she wasn't asking. 30 minutes later, the security supervisor appeared at Eva's office with a laptop containing the archived footage. He was a man in his 50s with the careful neutrality of someone who'd worked corporate security long enough to recognize when executives were fighting battles above his pay grade. "Ms. Sinclair," he said, setting up the laptop, "I've queued up the dates you requested, but I should mention Mr. Whitmore is also an authorized executive. If he was here working late, that's not irregular." "I understand," Eva said. "Thank you for pulling this on a Sunday." The supervisor left, and Eva and Darius huddled over the laptop. The footage showed the elevator interior time-stamped and dated. Eva fast-forwarded through hours of empty elevator car stopping whenever someone entered. The first date showed nothing. No one accessed the 7th floor after midnight, except the cleaning crew at 3 a.m. The second date was the same. But on the third date, September 13th at 1:17 a.m., Silas Whitmore entered the elevator and pressed the button for the 7th floor. "There," Eva breathed. "He was here." They continued through the footage, finding 3 more instances of Silas accessing the 7th floor during the late-night hours that matched the fraudulent transactions. Each time he was alone. Each time he stayed for approximately 30 minutes before returning to the lobby. "This proves he was here," Darius said. "But does it prove he was in your office using your computer?" Eva's face fell. "No. He could claim he was working in the conference room, or checking on something in another office. Without cameras on the 7th floor, we can't definitively place him at my desk." Darius felt frustration building. They were so close, the pieces were there, the pattern was clear, but not close enough for legal proof. Silas had been too careful, leaving just enough plausible deniability to escape consequences. "Wait," Eva said suddenly. "The HVAC system. You said buildings track temperature and airflow, right, for efficiency?" Darius nodded. "Yeah, most modern systems log everything. Temperature readings when units turn on and off, which zones are active. My office has its own climate control, separate from the rest of the floor because I'm always cold and kept complaining." Eva's eyes were bright with possibility. "If someone was in my office late at night using the computer generating heat, wouldn't the HVAC system register that?" "It would," Darius said slowly, his mind racing. The system would kick on to cool the room. And if it's as sophisticated as most new installations, it would log exactly when and why. Eva was already calling facilities management requesting access to the HVAC control system. The facilities manager, a woman named Patricia, who sounded annoyed at being bothered on a Sunday, eventually agreed to email Eva the access credentials. Darius logged into the system, using Eva's computer, navigating through the interface with the familiarity of someone who'd spent years working with similar setups. The data was all their temperature readings for every zone in the building, logged minute by minute going back years.
He pulled up Eva's office zone and filtered for the dates of the fraudulent transactions. Then he looked for patterns, times when the temperature rose slightly, triggering the cooling system to activate during hours when the office should have been empty. The correlation was perfect. On every date that matched a fraudulent transaction, Eva's office showed increased temperature and HVAC activity between midnight and 2 a.m. On dates without fraudulent activity, the temperature remained stable, the system dormant. "This is it," Darius said, pulling up the data in a spreadsheet and cross-referencing it with the security footage timestamps. "Look, September 13th, Silas enters the elevator at 1:17 a.m. At 1:19 a.m., your office temperature starts rising. At 1:47 a.m., he exits. At 1:49 a.m., the temperature starts dropping back to baseline." Eva stared at the screen, and Darius saw the moment hope return to her eyes. "He was in my office. Every time. The HVAC data proves it." Combined with the keylogger, the security footage, and the transaction records, it paints a pretty clear picture. Darius agreed. "Silas planted the keylogger, stole your password, came in late at night to use your computer, and transferred the money to accounts he controlled." Eva grabbed her phone and called Grace, her lawyer. It was past 8 p.m. on a Sunday, but Grace answered on the second ring. Eva explained everything in rapid-fire detail, the keylogger, the footage, the HVAC data, while Grace asked clarifying questions and made notes. When Eva hung up, she looked more alive than Darius had seen her since yesterday. "Grace is calling the FBI. Tonight. She says this is enough for a warrant. They'll freeze Silas's account, subpoena the offshore transactions, bring in forensic accountants. By morning, he'll be the one explaining himself to the board." Darius felt relief wash through him, so powerful it left him lightheaded. They'd done it. They'd actually done it. "So you're safe? Your job? Your company?" "Grace thinks so. The evidence is strong, and once the FBI starts digging, they'll find everything. Silas couldn't have covered his tracks perfectly." Eva stood and crossed to where Darius sat, pulling him into a hug that lasted longer than strictly necessary. "Thank you. I couldn't have done this without you. The HVAC data, I never would have thought of that." "That's because you think like a CEO," Darius said into her hair. "I think like a technician. Sometimes problems need both." They stayed like that for a moment, the city glowing beyond the windows, the weight of the crisis finally lifting. Darius became aware of the warmth of Eva's body against his, the subtle scent of her shampoo, the way she fit perfectly in his arms. When she pulled back to look at him, her face was close enough that he could see the silver flecks in her grey eyes. "I should go," she said quietly. "Grace is filing the FBI report tonight, and I need to be available if they have questions, and you should get home to Naomi." Darius nodded, though leaving felt wrong somehow, like they'd started something that wasn't finished yet. "What happens tomorrow? With the board meeting?" "Silas will be in custody if Grace's timeline is right. The FBI moves fast on white-collar crime when the evidence is this clear. I'll present what we found, explain that I was being framed, and the board will—" She trailed off, uncertainty flickering across her features. "They'll believe you," Darius said with more confidence than he felt. "You have proof. Hard evidence. They'll have no choice." Eva managed a small smile. "I hope you're right." They gathered their things and rode the elevator down together, neither speaking, both aware that something had shifted between them in the hours they'd spent hunting for proof. In the lobby, Eva called her car, while Darius headed for the subway entrance. "Darius!" she called after him. He turned, and she walked back, standing close enough that he had to look down to meet her eyes. "Tomorrow night, after the board meeting, can I see you and Naomi?" "Yeah," he said. "Of course." "I might not be a CEO anymore," she warned. "Depending on how the board reacts, this might have cost me everything." Darius thought about that about Eva, without her company, without the identity she'd built over 15 years. And he realized it didn't matter. The woman he'd met in the restaurant wasn't the CEO. She was the person underneath the one who cried at bedtime stories and ate pizza with 7-year-olds and trusted a stranger to help her solve an impossible problem. "Then you'll figure out what comes next," he said. "But you won't do it alone." Eva kissed him, then quick and soft,
a promise more than a passion. Then she was gone, sliding into the back of a black car that pulled away into the Sunday night traffic.
Darius took the subway home, his mind replaying the day in fragments. The fear in Eva's eyes when Silas had confronted her, the methodical way they'd hunted for evidence, the moment when the HVAC data had appeared on screen irrefutable and damning. He'd never been part of something like this before, something that mattered on a scale beyond his own small life. Mrs. Hartford was waiting when he got home, watching a baking show while Naomi slept on the couch beside her. "That took longer than expected," she observed, but there was no judgment in her voice. "It was complicated," Darius said, which was both true and wildly inadequate. "The lady from Friday night, she's in some kind of trouble." Darius sat in the armchair, exhaustion catching up to him all at once. "She was. I think we fixed it, or started to fix it." Mrs. Hartford studied him with the shrewd eyes of someone who'd lived through enough drama to recognize the real thing. "You be careful, Darius. That kind of trouble has a way of spreading, and you've got Naomi to think about." "I know." He looked at his daughter, sleeping peacefully, despite the turmoil that had consumed his day. "But sometimes you have to help people, even when it's risky." "Especially then," Mrs. Hartford agreed. She gathered her things and headed for the door, pausing to pat his shoulder. "Angela would be proud of you, the man you've become, the father you are." The words hit him hard, unexpected, and needed. He thanked her, locked the door behind her, and carried Naomi to her bed. She stirred as he tucked her in her eyes, opening just enough to focus on his face. "Did you help Miss Eva?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. "Yeah, baby girl. I think I did." "Good. She needs people." Naomi's eyes closed again. "Like we needed Mrs. H when Mummy died. Everybody needs people." Darius sat on the edge of her bed long after she fell back asleep, thinking about what she'd said. Everybody needs people. It was such a simple truth, the kind of thing a child could see clearly, while adults spent years building walls to avoid it. His phone buzzed. A text from Eva. "FBI is interviewing Silas now. Grace says they're charging him tonight. It's really happening." He texted back, "Told you! Evidence doesn't lie." Her response came quickly. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be intense." He wanted to ask if she was okay, if she was scared, if she needed anything, but those questions felt inadequate for the magnitude of what she was facing. Instead, he wrote, "You've got this, and if you don't, we'll figure it out together." The three dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, together. I like the sound of that. Monday morning arrived cold and clear, the kind of October day that made New York feel like the center of the universe. Darius got Naomi ready for school, made her lunch, walked her to the bus stop. Normal routines that felt surreal given what he knew was happening in a glass tower in Midtown. His phone rang at 9:30. Eva's name on the screen, and he answered immediately. "How'd it go?" "Silas is in federal custody. The FBI arrested him at 6 this morning." Eva's voice was steady, but Darius could hear the strain underneath. "The board meeting is starting in 10 minutes. They want me to explain everything." "You'll be great," Darius said, wishing he could be there, knowing his presence would help nothing. "I'm stepping down," Eva said abruptly. "Not because they're asking me to, because I want to. I'm transitioning to chairman of the board and bringing in a new CEO to run day-to-day operations." Darius felt his breath catch. "Eva, I've been thinking about it all night. 15 years I've given to this company. 15 years of 18-hour days and sacrificed relationships and dinners alone at my desk. And for what? So Silas could almost destroy it while I was too busy working to notice." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I'm tired, Darius. I'm tired of being a function instead of a person. Grace was right. You were right. There's more to life than this." "What will you do?" Darius asked, trying to imagine Eva without the CEO title, without the company that had defined her. "I don't know yet, but I'm going to figure it out. And I'm going to do it while actually living, instead of just working." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer. "Is the invitation still open? For tonight, I'd really like to see you and Naomi." "Of course it's open. Come over whenever you're done. We'll order pizza." "Perfect. I'll bring dessert." Another pause. "Darius, thank you for everything. For seeing me when I was invisible. For helping when you had no reason to. For reminding me that people can be good." "You don't have to thank me for that," Darius said. "That's just what people do, when they care." "Not in my experience," Eva said quietly. "But maybe my experience was limited."
She hung up to prepare for the board meeting, and Darius went about his day in a daze. He had 3 service calls scheduled: a broken compressor in Queens, a furnace that wouldn't ignite in the Bronx, a thermostat issue in Manhattan. Normal problems with normal solutions, and he was grateful for the distraction. Between calls, he checked his phone obsessively. No updates from Eva. He tried not to worry, tried to trust that the evidence would speak for itself, that the board would see the truth. But he'd learned that the world didn't always work the way it should, that justice wasn't guaranteed just because you'd done everything right. His phone finally rang at 4:30. Eva's voice was exhausted but victorious. "It's done. The board accepted my resignation as CEO and appointed me chairman."
They're launching a full internal review of all financial processes, and they voted unanimously to cooperate fully with the FBI investigation. So you're okay? Your reputation? Intact. Enhanced even. Apparently discovering and stopping a major embezzlement plot makes you look pretty competent. She laughed, and this time it sounded genuine. "I'm leaving now. I'll be at your place in an hour." Darius looked around his apartment laundry draped over chairs, Naomi's toys scattered like landmines, dishes from breakfast still in the sink. An hour wasn't enough time to make the place presentable for a billionaire. Then again, Eva had already seen it at its worst. If she was coming back, it meant she didn't care about the mess. "See you soon," he said, and hung up to begin the futile task of creating order from chaos. Naomi arrived home from school with a painting she'd made in art class, a solar system with 8 planets and a very sad Pluto relegated to the corner. "It's for Miss Eva," she announced, "because she understands about Pluto." Darius felt his heart squeeze. His daughter had decided to claim Eva to pull her into the small circle of people who mattered. It was terrifying and beautiful in equal measure. Eva arrived at 6, carrying a bakery box that turned out to contain a chocolate cake, elaborate enough for a wedding. Naomi squealed and hugged Eva's waist, presenting her painting with the pride of an artist unveiling a masterpiece. "This is amazing," Eva said, studying the painting seriously. "Can I keep it? I have a wall at home that would be perfect for this." Naomi glowed, and Darius ordered pizza while they settled on the couch. Eva had changed from her CEO armor into jeans and a sweater, her hair down and loose around her shoulders. She looked younger without the corporate polish, more real. Over pizza, Eva told them about the board meeting in terms Naomi could understand, how she'd found out someone was taking money that wasn't theirs, how she and Darius had worked together to prove who did it, how the bad person was now in trouble with the police. "Like a mystery," Naomi said, delighted. "You and Daddy were detectives." "Something like that," Eva agreed, catching Darius's eye across the pizza box. After dinner, they cut into the elaborate cake, and Naomi insisted they eat it while watching a documentary about Mars. Eva asked questions about the documentary with the same genuine interest she'd shown all weekend, and Naomi explained Martian geology with the confidence of someone who'd read every library book on the subject. Bath time came too soon, and Naomi insisted Eva help. Darius left them to it, cleaning up the pizza boxes and cake plates, listening to his daughter's laughter echo from the bathroom. When they emerged, Naomi in pajamas, Eva with wet spots on her sweater from splashing, his daughter announced, "Miss Eva should read the bedtime story tonight. Daddy always does the voices wrong." "I do not," Darius protested, but he was already being overruled. They crowded onto Naomi's bed again, the 3 of them barely fitting in the small space. Eva read about the girl who built a rocket to Mars, doing the voices with theatrical flair that made Naomi giggle. When the chapter ended, Naomi looked at both of them with an expression too serious for a 7-year-old. "Is Miss Eva going to stay?" she asked. "Like, stay, or is she going away again?" Darius opened his mouth to deflect, to give some non-answer about how grown-ups had complicated lives, but Eva spoke first. "I'd like to stay if that's okay with you," she told Naomi. "Not tonight, I have my own home I need to go to, but I'd like to come back. A lot. If you and your dad want that too." Naomi considered this with the gravity of someone making an important decision. "Okay, but you have to promise to come back. Not like the blind date that didn't show up. Real promises." "Real promises," Eva agreed, holding out her pinky. Naomi linked her own pinky with Eva's, sealing the contract with the seriousness it deserved. They tucked Naomi in together, leaving her door cracked and her nightlight on. In the living room, Eva sank onto the couch with the exhaustion of someone who'd been running on adrenaline for 3 days straight. "Thank you," she said, "for this, for letting me be part of it." Darius sat beside her close enough that their shoulders touched. "You don't have to thank me. You're always welcome here." "I meant what I told Naomi, about coming back, about wanting to stay." Eva turned to face him.
I know this is fast. I know we barely know each other. But these past 3 days with you and Naomi, I felt more like myself than I have in years. Maybe ever. Maybe.
Darius thought about that.
3 days. 72 hours since he'd been sitting alone in a restaurant convinced he'd be alone forever. And now here was this woman who'd crashed into his life with her corporate crisis and her loneliness and her capacity to love his daughter, asking if she could stay. "It is fast," he agreed, "and we should probably slow down, get to know each other properly, date like normal people." Eva's face fell slightly. But I don't want to," Darius admitted. "Slow down, I mean. Life's too short. I learned that when Angela died. You don't get unlimited time with people, so when you find something good, you hold on to it." "Is this good?" Eva asked quietly. "You and me." Darius looked at her, really looked, and saw past the CEO and the billionaire to the woman who cried at bedtime stories and made pinky promises with 7-year-olds and had trusted a stranger to save her when everyone else had agendas. "Yeah," he said. "This is good."
Eva kissed him then, properly this time, and Darius kissed back with the certainty of someone who'd spent 4 years in the dark and finally found light. When they broke apart, Eva was smiling the real smile he'd first seen in the restaurant, the one that transformed her face. "I should go," she said without moving. "It's late and you have work tomorrow." "You could stay," Darius offered. "The couch pulls out. It's not fancy, but it's comfortable enough." Eva looked around the small apartment at Naomi's drawings on the walls, at the second-hand furniture, at the life Darius had built from grief and determination. "I'd like that," she said. "If you're sure." He was sure. More sure than he'd been about anything since Angela's diagnosis. So he pulled out the couch bed and found clean sheets, while Eva called her assistant to reschedule her morning meetings. They said goodnight with another kiss softer this time, full of promise. Darius lay in his own bed, listening to the apartment settle, thinking about the weekend that had just passed. He'd helped solve a crime. He'd maybe probably started something with a woman who lived in a different world. He'd let someone new into Naomi's life, into their carefully constructed cocoon of safety. It was terrifying. It was reckless. It was everything he'd been avoiding for 4 years. It was also, he realized, the first time he'd felt truly alive since Angela died. His phone buzzed with a text. "Eva from the living room. Thank you for letting me belong." He smiled in the darkness and typed back, "You already do." In the morning he'd make coffee and pancakes. Eva would meet Naomi over breakfast and his daughter would tell long stories about school while Eva listened like every word mattered. They'd figure out what came next. How to date when one person was a billionaire and the other lived paycheck to paycheck. How to build something real when their worlds were so different. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, Darius fell asleep knowing that for the first time in 4 years, he wasn't alone. And neither was Eva, and neither was Naomi. They'd found each other in the wreckage of blind dates that never happened, and somehow that wreckage had built something stronger than any of them could have planned. Sometimes the best things in life came from showing up when you weren't expected, from being seen, when you felt invisible, from trusting a stranger to become something more. And sometimes Darius thought, as sleep finally claimed him, love arrived not when you were looking for it, but when you'd finally learned to be yourself again.